Hi class, so this video is going to go over a similar example to help you on Excel assignment for the class. So this document is also uploaded onto Canvas, so I would recommend downloading this Excel file and following along with me as you watch through my video. Right, so for your Excel assignment, you're going to do something similar with this, except you're going to use SAT data, and here I have some ACT data, right? So the first thing that you want to notice is here in this column we have score. It says score listed, and then below it we have a bunch of scores, right? So if we scroll all the way down, looks like I would have 121 data, right? Because we have score in row 1. So the first thing I would do when working with this is highlight that range, and then we can go in here and we can name this range data, for example, right? And by naming this data, every time I type in data into Excel, Excel is going to know that I'm talking about this specific range, right? So this is an absolute cell reference. It will always absolutely reference this range, right? So then part A, what we're asked to do is to create a histogram. So creating a histogram in Excel takes a little bit of work, right? What we have to do is we have to be able to fill in this frequency column, right? So these are my bins or my class widths as we explored before, and then here this is frequency, right? The count. So how much of our data fit inside of this range and so on, right? So in order to do this, we first have to use these cutoffs, these two columns. Right, so what I would do, so let me zoom in here so you can see a little better. So what I would do is click in here, and we're going to use what's called the COUNTIF function, right? So as I type in COUNTIF, notice this pops up, and Excel will tells you what that formula is for, right? It says counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition, right? So that's what we want, right? So what I want to tell Excel to do is to look at this range that we call data, and then count all the scores that are less than 3, right, over here, right? So I can just click in the cell or type D4, right? And if I close this parenthesis and hit enter, then what Excel did is it looked at all the data cells, it checked each one, right? And if one of the scores showed up less than 3, it would count, right? Just as you would do by hand, right? So now what I can do is I can actually just drag this all the way down, right? Fill this down, and Excel will change in the formula. So in the formula I referenced D4, right? When I pull this down, since I didn't put a $sign in front of D or 4, that's a relative cell addressing. So as I pull this down in the formula, it will always look to the left, right, for that condition. So if I look in here, like if I double click here, notice Excel is using less than 17, right, for the condition. If I check this one, it's using D17, less than 29, right? So as I fill down, Excel's smart and knows that I want to fill down the row as I go along, right? But what's real important is this, since I named this data, that doesn't change, right? I don't want that. I don't want those cells to shift down at all as I fill down. Right? And another important thing to look for is this very last box should be all of your data. So we already looked at that we have 120 pieces of data. So this last one should be equal to 120, right? So now's where it might become a little tricky. So there is zero pieces of data over here, right? So if you wanted, we could just type in 0 all along. So then, like, this box is really my first box. So if I want to look at what's the count between 13 and 15, well, there'd only be one cell, right? So you could just hit equals and then reference the cell over here, right? There's only going to be one cell. But to get this cell, the answer is not going to be 5, right? So let me open up OneNote and draw this for you so you can follow along what I'm talking about. Oops. All right. So what you should recognize, these bins are in what we call interval notation, right? So if we have, like, beside less than 15 and less than 17, we have 13 dot 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 15. Right, it looks like this. And then where it says less than 17, right, it has 15 with a bracket beside dot dot dot, and then 17 parenthesis. So what this is doing is this is just a way for me to write this in interval notation, but really what I'm after is this, right? 13 comma 15, right? And this, what I'm after is 15 comma 17, not including 17 but including 15, right? So remember, in interval notation we use a bracket to include and a parenthesis to exclude, right? So if I want to draw this one on a number line, right, so 13, 15, let me grab a different color, right? So what that means is we're counting all values that start at 13 and including 13, and then going all the way to 15, but not including values at 15. So if you draw this on a number line, right, you have a closed circle around 13, but an open circle around 15, right? We're taking all values that start at 13, including 13, and go all the way to 15, right? So you could write it like this, draw a picture, or if you want to write it using inequalities, right, you could say 13 is going to be less than or equal to x, which is less than 15, right? This would mean the same thing, right? So vice versa for less than 17. So let me draw a number line here, right? And let's think about what this less than 15 box is counting, right over here. It is 1, right? So Excel already told us less than 15, there's one data value, right, that is less than 15. So what Excel is doing is looking and seeing what numbers are to the left of 15, and that would not be including 15, right? We're looking for all of these values, right? Count all of those. And then when you ask Excel to look for all the values that are less than 17, right? Excel found 5 data values. So here's 17. So less than 17 would be an open circle at 17, right? And then we'd be looking at all the values to the right, right? But the problem is in this next frequency is I only want the values in between 15 and 17, right? So in other words, I want to cut off all of the values less than 15, right? We need to get rid of those. So if I tell Excel to take this 5, right, and then minus 1, that will give me 4, which is the number of values that are in between here, right? So in between here, that leaves there are 4 numbers left, right? So when we go in Excel, right, the formula that I'm going to want here is equals, and then this cell, and then minus 1, right? So what we want to do is count, well, how many values are less than 17, and then we want to throw out the number of values that are less than 15, right? So you'd hit enter, and then now if I fill this down, Excel will be smart and do what I would ask, right? So like for this box less than 27, so I want for this bins I want the values between 25 and 27. So that means if I take this cell box, right, I need to subtract off the numbers less than 25 because I want to get rid of everything less than 25, right? I only want 25 to 27. So if I throw those away, then this would be the right equation, right? Subtract to get that value, so forth, right? So typically when you're doing like a histogram, like in your example, you don't have all of these zeros, right? So the general rule of thumb is you're always gonna, this first box, hit equals, and then the value over here for the count if function, right, on the very first row, and then in the second row you're gonna type in the equation equals, and then this box minus the one above it, right? This will count just between 3 and 5. And then you can just fill this down, right? So that's the general way to do that. And if we highlight all of these values, if we look at the very bottom here in the small print, we're given the average, the count, and the sum. Notice the sum tells me 120, right? So that means of these selected cells, the sum is 120. That's good, right? Because that's how much data we have. So you always check that, right? I highly recommend to make sure you have these formulas set up correctly, right? So that's part A, right? We're filling in this table, right? So that we can create a histogram. So then here we're actually pasting the histogram. So to create a histogram from this, you're going to highlight these two columns, hit insert, and then we want to go to a bar chart, right? So we can click this, and then you can just go to this first one here. Will work fine, right? So let me drag this down here, right? Because that's where I asked you to put it. Right? So remember, a histogram is a special type of bar chart. So some things that I would do. So here, these are just different different ways to make your graph look differently. So I actually prefer a dark background. So you can pick, which one looks appealing to you, right? Better for your eyes. It doesn't make a difference. And then also, if you remember, in a histogram, the bars should be touching, right? We're in a bar, a normal bar chart. They don't necessarily have to be touching. So to make these bars touching, you double click on the bars. And then over here on the right, notice some settings popped up, and there's this option gap width. So I like to change this gap width to about 5%. Right, so now you'll notice that my bars are really close to touching, right? So I like to keep it at 5% just so I can barely see where the bars are different. But it still appears that they're touching, and we can see the distribution, right, from this still. So another thing I might do is come up here and change the title of my graph, right, my chart title. So we could call this I don't know, just something like histogram of ACT scores, right? That is perfectly fine. So then also what you might also want to do is to come over here and go to add chart element, and then go to axis titles and add a primary axis title, and then go to axis titles and hit a primary vertical. So now we can name our axes. So here I might just call these my bins, and then here you could just call this frequency, right? All right, so I think that looks pretty good, right? So that's how you can make a histogram in Excel. So then if we come back up here to part B, it says what type of distribution do you have, right? So I'm going to right click in this box and go to format cells, and then go to alignment, and I'm going to pick this option wrap text. So what that'll do is it'll make my typing look cleaner and nicer. It won't try to make everything be on one line, right? It tells Excel basically, please go down to the next line after we reach the end, right? So looking at my histogram, right, that we just made, and comparing it to the distributions that we've talked about, I mean, I would definitely say this appears to be a symmetric distribution, right? It looks to be like a bell type of shape, right, that we've talked about in class. So we got our tallest bars in the center, and it looks to be somewhat symmetric, right? So again, remember that it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Perfectly symmetrical. So we could say something to the effect, we have a symmetric distribution So why do we think so, right? Answering that part. So after looking at the histogram, the overall shape is symmetrical with the tallest bars in the center. So we could say we have a bell shape, right? Something like that would be perfectly fine, right? We're saying what type of distribution we have and you know what brought us to that conclusion, right? So then now we want to create these what were called 8 basic statistics: the mean, median, mode, standard deviation, the min, the max, the range, and the count, right? So I'll show you how to do this. And Excel has Excel functions for many of these also, right? So to find the mean, Excel doesn't have a mean function, but it has an average function, right? So we can just pick this, right? And then here, now what you're inputting is what do we find the average of? So remember, we called our data data, right? So I can just type in average data, and now it pulls all those scores that we named data on the left and finds the mean of them, right? And then now I can find the median. So I can use the median command and type in data, right? And hit enter, and there's the median of all those values, right? Then I can hit equals and find mode. And the one I want you to use is this very bottom one. This is just like the very basic. So just pick that and then click data and enter, right? And we found the mode. Then the next row, standard deviation. So that command is stdev. So again, I want you to pick this one. There are other options, but pick this most basic one here, stdev, and then type in data, and then hit enter, and there's my standard deviation, right? And then I can hit equals min, use the min function to find the minimum value. So Excel is just looking for what's the smallest value that appears, and that is 14. And then we can use the max function, so max, to find the maximum value. So I just type in data, hit enter, 35, right? And then for range, there is not a Excel command for range, but the range is just the max minus the min, right? So I could hit equals max minus the min. So I can just reference those cells and subtract, and we get 21, right? 35 minus 14 is 21. So that's the range of my scores. And then now I can look at the count. So there is a just regular count function. So the count function just counts how many things we are, where we use the countif function if we want to give us certain criteria, right? Only count the ones that are blue, only count the ones that are red, so forth, right? So we can say the count of my data, and that will return all 120, right? So count function counts everything. Countif, you can give it criteria for what to count, right? So not too bad. And then in part D, so we're typing again, so I'm going to go in and format cells, and I want to go to the alignment tab and hit wrap text again, right? Again, just makes everything look much nicer and neater, right? So it says, what does the standard deviation tell us about our data, right? So we're looking at this this row, right? This statistic. So what we could say is that the standard deviation tells us that the average distance from the mean for our data values is 4.472 points, right? So remember, the standard deviation is always in the same units as your data, right? That's why we prefer standard deviation over variance most of the time. So standard deviation, right, is going to have the same unit. So the unit here are points, right? These are scores. So if you got 21 points, you know, on the ACT test and so forth. So we want to use points, right? So that's how we can get part D. And then part E, lastly, is calculating the 5-number summary. So 5-number summary is helpful, and remember the visual with the 5-number summary is called the box plot. And actually, creating a box plot in Excel is not so easy. So I would recommend not creating a box plot in Excel. If you had to create a box plot for like your job or to present some data, maybe you're doing some research, I would highly recommend using a statistical package for a box plot. So maybe use like R, which we'll explore. And in one of the R assignments, I'm gonna actually have you create like box plot and do some of these descriptive statistics, but in R. So we'll get to that. So Excel is very helpful, very powerful, but R is really nice too. All right. So to calculate the min, right? We already did this before. We can just type in the min function and data, right, to get the minimum value. We did the median also already, right? So we can just type that in, and the max we already found. I already showed you how to find that also, right? So we equals max and data, right? So Q1 and Q3 might be a little harder to find, right? So what you do is you type in equals and then type in quartile, and again do the very basic one, the one at the bottom. And then what you're typing in first is the array. So again, like what's your data? So our data, we name data, so we can just reference that. And then when you hit comma, this pops up, right? So 0 is for the minimum value, 1 is for first quartile, 2 is for the median or quartile 2, 3 is for the third quartile, and 4 is the max, right? So we can just double click on which one we want to find, or you can type that in, right? So we want the Q1, so we can double click on that, close our parentheses, hit enter, right? And there's Q1. So to find Q3, we do the same. We type in the function quartile, and then we type in our what data set we're looking at, and then we want 3, right, for quartile 3. Hit enter, and there you find it, right? So there's the 5 number summary. All right, so that should be enough to help you with how to use an Excel. So if you haven't used Excel before, I did post a video that I made for my quantitative reasoning class just to lay a foundation for how to use Excel, and I also posted an Excel appendix, so you can reference that video or that Excel appendix for if to help you feel more comfortable with how to do certain things in Excel. But I think this video, you know, as long as you follow what I did, you'll be fine on the Excel assignment, right? All right, so if you have any questions, you know, you can feel free to email me, right? It's mailit@mtc.edu. I'll be glad to help. All right, thanks.